Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Woke by Accident podcast. Today we have a special guest, Dominic Lawson.
Justice for you and me. Justice for Mike Brown.
No justice, no peace.
After the death that shook the entire country, I decided to step up as a community activist and create a global podcast, Woke by Accident. Here, I amplify compelling news stories and matters impacting African Americans and their communities. My goal is to give a voice to the voiceless and have the difficult conversations needed to advance relations and matters of race. Tune in to Woke by Accident podcast. I am your host, Jen, and it is streaming on all of your favorite streaming platforms, as well as our website, www.wokebyaccident.net. Thank you for listening and take care.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Woke by Accident podcast. Today we have a special guest, Dominic Lawson, a brand strategist and award-winning podcast host, which includes Black is America podcast and the Startup Life podcast. Welcome, Dominic.
Thank you so much for having me, Jen. Really an honor to be on your show.
Oh, for sure. Hope you're doing well.
I'm making it day by day, living a dream. It's all good.
For sure. Definitely glad to have you on. I was glad to connect with Dominic on the Clubhouse app with some of our podcast friends and other creatives that we've come to know. So just really glad to have a conversation with you and get your take on some topics that I found pretty interesting today. So let's see. So this first story is about this podcaster, actually, podcast situation. So I want to get your take as a podcaster in the game. So the trademark infringement lawsuit was filed in Manhattan federal court, and there was a claim made that the podcast led listeners to believe it was endorsed by Winfrey, Kelly Carter Jackson, and Leah Wright. Relure. I'm not sure how that last name is pronounced. Do you know how the last name is pronounced?
I do not. I didn't even try it. I just
so we have
I just roll with it, right?
Two podcasters, Kelly and Leah, and they're using a podcast name, Operdemics. And so for their live events, Harpo alleges that during a Tribeca Film Festival that basically they decided to pursue the lawsuit after the Operdemics podcast proceeded. And so there was confusion to the audience about the name with using the logo, parts about the old symbol being used. And so we talked about this in a podcast room and such. So I want to hear your thoughts about the lawsuit in general, trademark infringement. And it's interesting because they actually kind of did this as a nod to Oprah, but it kind of got turned around a bit.
Right. So it's an interesting case because, as we look at it, they're not exactly Oprah's legal team. They're not looking to get like any monetary damages or to have existing episodes taken down. It's almost kind of like don't do that anymore, right? We appreciate the love, we appreciate this, that, and the other, but like don't do that anymore. And I think, and we kind of talked about this, a little bit, with our group and stuff like that. About it's interesting that she's not asking for that stuff. And then, I come to find out in another kind of clubhouse room or whatever the case may be, they had a lawyer on talking about this, and he talked about the principle of latches when it comes to trademark law and copyright law, essentially saying that, when you have a copyright of something, if you don't, and somebody infringes upon it, if you don't go after them, it's like if you don't use it, you lose it. So it was kind of an interesting take for it to kind of come to be. But, it's interesting, as podcasters, we're always influenced by other podcasters or things that we see, TV
Mhm.
shows, movies, and stuff like that. And so it can be tempting and very hard to not kind of, advertently or inadvertently kind of copy things or wherever the case may be. But it is definitely a big no-no for the most part. Everybody likes to talk about uh, fair use and things of that
Right.
nature when it comes to copyright and stuff like that. And we can kind of get into that a little bit because I use copyrighted material for Black is America, being a history podcast and stuff like that. But back to the Oprah thing, it was a very interesting case, and I think that it's definitely a lesson for podcasters to be aware, or podcasters or any content creator to be aware of, like, especially when you talk about the brand that is Oprah. Don't go after it. Don't use it as much as you can
Right.
avoid that for sure. But it's always cool to pay homage, though, for sure.
Yeah, and I can see where a viewer or someone in the audience just, looking on the outside, looking in, maybe, oh, this is a collaboration or something like that, kind of like that
That is true.
conversation we had about Beyonce and Khalees, if you will, where, oh, this is a
Mhm.
collaboration. No, it's not a collaboration. It's something different, even though that was kind of a different situation. She wasn't aware of it. You know what I mean? In Khalees's case, and so it wasn't a true collaboration
Right.
where, and so when they think that Oprah has joined hands with these young ladies to do this project, and that's not the case.
Right. And I think another thing to be mindful of, because a lot of people like to talk about, fair use, fair use.
Mhm.
I know, again, not a lawyer, not an attorney, so take this with a grain of salt, whoever's listening. But I know in many of the cases they look at, are you trying to monetize, right?
Okay.
And so that can go a long way as to, is it fair use? Is it not? It's not a slam dunk one way or the other, but that's one of the things they look into. It did appear that maybe they was trying to monetize, or maybe not. I'm not entirely sure. But again, it was very, even though it could be seen as transformative, especially when you talk about the old logo, because they had like flowers over her head and stuff like that. It could be seen as
Mhm.
transformative type of, intellectual property, but at the same time, it's Oprah in the name. We know who you're talking about. Like it's kind of hard to
Right.
kind of
And
get,
it's
get away from it. So
interesting. In that room with the attorney, and he said that, it's not just about monetization, and
right.
and I think every creative kind of interprets that in their own way, because there's some YouTubers that I tune into, when they throw in clips that are other people's work, they said this is
Hmm.
for research purposes, or they put their little fair use verbiage up. Is that okay? Is that okay? And he said, fair use is okay. Basically, like, it's almost like if you get caught, you can kind of hang fair use up there. What's your thought on the fair use?
And the thing is about fair use is that, like, it's not a slam dunk. Like, each
Hmm.
case is a case by case basis. You know what I mean? And so when you get hit with that lawsuit, they're going to look at all the factors. They're going to look at how much of the copyrighted content you use. They're going to look at how you used it. They're going to look at if you're trying to monetize, not trying to monetize, and things of
Right.
that nature. So, like, just to say, just up fair use, fair use, fair use, that's not how that works. And so, like I said, I use copyrighted material, but a lot of the copyrighted material I use is government assets from, the United States government, Library of Congress, National
Okay.
Archives, things of that nature. So government assets can't be copyrighted. So, like, it's a president's speech, an elected official's speech, or something like that, that
Hmm.
can't be copyrighted. But even in that same thing, I found out that because we recently did an episode on Black is America commemorating the 59th anniversary of the March on Washington. And so I
Okay.
told the story of Ledger Smith, who took roller skates from Chicago to DC to get to the march. And so I'm looking at a bunch of speeches and stuff like that, came across the Martin Luther King speech, and coming to find out that they had muted that part, his entire speech, because it's copyrighted by the King estate. They have a copyright to it that doesn't release until, I believe, about 16 years from now,
Oh,
in
wow.
2038. Even though he's on government property because he's at the Lincoln Memorial, but he's not an elected official. And so that speech is copyrighted. And so a lot of people got in trouble. CBS News, CNN got in trouble in the years past for using it, and it's not fair use in that regard, I guess, in how they were using it or whatever. So
Okay.
it's an interesting case. This Oprah, it's like I'm not happy for the podcasters that this case came to light, but I'm happy for podcasters in general because it sparks this type of conversation about fair use, what you can use, what you cannot use, how much of it you can use, and the thing is, I have parameters in place myself where I have owners and admissions, insurance in case there's a lawsuit or anything like that. But we do
Mhm.
try our best at Black is America to make sure it is for educational purposes, for history purposes. And some people like Universal Music Group, they have a copyright claim on YouTube, but they say you can use it because we see it's for educational purposes. And I told them like, hey, I'm not trying to monetize Black is America. That's not what it's for.
Mhm.
So there are times where you can use it, but to be safe, ask for the license, ask if you can use it, and just know that if you're going to use it and you're going to claim fair use, make sure you're okay with whatever comes from that. And so,
Yeah.
again, one of the things that I do when I use something, for example, another episode for Black is America, we talked about the American Revolutionary War, and we use assets from Good Times, if you will, the
Mhm.
show Good Times from the 70s. And so in that episode, I'm explaining what Good Times is, how many seasons it ran for, what
I
network it
saw
was
that
on. So
one. I love how
so
you did that.
I appreciate that. And so in that aspect, I'm educating as I'm going along with that space. Now, is there also a risk with that? Absolutely. But the
Mm,
thing is that courts have asked companies to see if podcasters or creatives are using it in a fair use manner
mhm.
before you drop a lawsuit or a cease and desist. Most people will drop a cease and desist, and then if they say that, you just take it down. It's no big deal, and I
Right,
don't
right.
have a problem with that. But and that's how I use copyrighted material. I make sure that it's pertinent to the content that we're creating, and then I
Mhm.
explain what it is. Like I said, with Good Times, I'm explaining what network it was on. No, I even described the scene that was playing in that episode.
Mhm.
So again, is it a risk? Yes, but we do have parameters in place, like insurance, like if there's a cease and desist, you take it down, things of that nature. So.
Okay, that's good to know as a YouTuber myself, and I actually don't consider myself a YouTuber, but I guess I am. And then being in the podcast space because early on I did use a lot of news clips. I did speak with some attorneys in rooms, and they said that for the purposes that I'm using it for, a news commentary, it's sort of
Right.
appropriate or it's allowed rather.
And that's why the fair use argument is case by case basis. Like a lot of
Hmm.
times, people like to scare you. Oh, these people got $150,000 fine, lawsuit, whatever the case may be. But when you go and look at the case, that's because the people in question just literally just took the song or whatever and just put
Right.
it in the show. Right? There's no explanation. There's
Yeah.
no whatever. They just put it in the show. And so, like I said, we're using it as an educational piece to kind
Okay.
of highlight something and stuff like that. So again, not a slam dunk, not an attorney, but that's one of the things we do in order to say that we're using it in a fair use way.
Okay, and that's a great consideration. So, yeah, something to consider for people wanting to enter the space. So, definitely wanted to have you speak with me about that. So, thank you for
Mhm.
sharing that. This next case, more along the lines of our woke by accident flavor, if you
Right.
will. Yeah, let's find it. Okay, so this case here, we have a black firefighter, Jared Jones, and he felt pressure to attend a party in Rochester, New York. This party had a Juneteenth theme, and he had, after attending the event, he has now filed a legal notice saying that he was a victim of discrimination. So at this party, the host of the party, this couple, the Nicosias, they had fried chicken with Juneteenth flags being displayed over the chicken. They had Hennessy and just a lot of things mocking Juneteenth in his opinion. And so he, filed suit with this, and he felt great pressure to attend with other coworkers the event. And the couple who were the hosts of the party had a press conference. I shared that with you. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that, with their response to the lawsuit and the fried chicken and that kind of thing. And then it also was revealed that the one of the hosts of the party had a Twitter account with racist material, which their explanation was a parody Twitter account. So your thoughts on this, Dominic?
It's a whole hot mess, is what this is. It's a
Yeah.
whole hot mess. As people of color and, being in corporate America and stuff like that, we find ourselves in these situations quite often where, do we say something? Do we play ball? Do we ruffle feathers? Do we just keep quiet and stuff like that? And so one of the things I always say is a lot of times people say when you're being strong, when you're being quiet, you're being strong. But I think when you're being quiet, you're being invisible. And
Mm,
so people tend not to know what's going on with you unless you say something. Being also in the behavioral health space, we say that, speak to somebody, talk to somebody when you have something going on. And so this brother, he first of all, he was felt pressured to go to this party. He didn't seem like he really wanted to attend in the
right.
first place. And then when he gets there, right, there's the other element of, let's just call a spade a spade, a pretty racially charged theme of this
Yes.
party. You know what I mean? And I think they said that they were trying to attack liberalism or something like
Yes.
that. But you could have went in a different direction. You could have had some hipster clothing out. You could have went with the avocado toast out somewhere. You know what I mean?
Right.
It just seemed like with the Hennessy, the chicken, the Juneteenth flag, there's a lot of black stuff happening around with your themed party here. You know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
intimating to black stuff, culture or whatever the case may be. So excuse me. So it's just very interesting how people like that think they can justify pretty much anything. Because I mean, to be fair, they live in a bubble and they get away with a lot.
Yes.
Being in positions of power or perceived power, for that matter. Uh, and so it's just interesting that they think they can get away with stuff like that. And so I applaud this brother for filing a lawsuit. And honestly, I'm actually appreciate the way he went about it. I know people may say, what, you should have said something at the party, this and the other. It reminds me of something I tell young black boys and young black women when they go off to college.
Mhm.
As you go off to college your first time on your own and stuff like that, and you get pulled over by the cops or something like that. I was like, look, don't sidewalk litigate. Do what you need to do to stay alive, and then we fight it in court. We fight it somewhere else. And so I think this brother kind of took that type of advice or got that advice from somewhere and just said, you know what, I'm
Mm,
gonna keep quiet for now. You know what I mean? And I'm just gonna
that's
take it to
true.
court. You know what I mean? And so I think a lot of times, you know, and there's many criticism of the legal system, right? But I think a lot of times, we have to try as much as humanly possibly can be mindful of who has home court advantage. Had he said something at that party, he doesn't have home court advantage, right?
Mm,
So at the
that's so
very
true.
least, is at the very least, in some way, form, or fashion, depending on how you view the legal system as a person of color, you at least level the playing field in the courtroom, right? You level the playing field being litigious in that matter, because if he had said something at that party and raised his voice 1 decibel, who's to say they wouldn't call the cops?
That's
Who's to
true.
say somebody would have did something to him?
That's
Right?
right.
And on top of losing his job, possibly, right? To a
Right.
party that I have to remind he didn't even want to go to in the first place, right? So
Right.
it's
Yeah.
I think a lot of times, and this is something that's been interesting to me fairly recently. There's this notion of called post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Ooh, yes.
Essentially, it's the idea that there is a level of PTSD for people of color when it comes from things from chattel slavery, Jim
Yes.
Crow, segregation, discrimination, all that other stuff. And so when he talks about suing for emotional distress, I have no issue with it because
Yeah.
again, you're inciting certain feelings and emotions and trauma. Let's be honest,
Mhm.
racialized trauma. When you have you're supposed to go to a party, which is by definition a place of jovial fellowship
Yes.
and convening with people. You get there and there's Hennessy, fried chicken, Juneteenth. I mean, I get that certain people are blind to certain things and they're in the bubble, but I'm sorry, that happened. And so I applaud that brother for not saying something at the party, but taking legal action.
I love that you said that. I actually got to hear Dr. DeGroot speak on Clubhouse, and I bought that book so quick, so quick, and yeah, it was a great read. So totally, and I didn't even think of that and make that connection, but totally, yeah. I mean, we
Mhm.
have a right to be offended, and like you said, those feelings are valid, for sure.
Right, and we also not only do we have a right not to be offended, we have a right to feel comfortable. We have a right
Yes.
to feel safe in a space, no matter what space that is. You know what I mean? Even if
Hmm.
it is at somebody's party. And so, again, taking, not doing something at that party when he didn't have home court advantage and taking legal action. Honestly, I don't know if he came up with that move or the thing I was saying earlier about the advice that I give young black boys and black girls when they go to school, but I don't know
Hmm.
who told him to do it, but it was a smart move if you ask me. It really was.
Definitely. And it made me think too, just pondering this, if, like you said, we've been in corporate America in different spaces, and maybe you've heard, you know, mixed companies say something that may have been off color and made you feel uncomfortable. Do you, and you make that determination, like, oh, okay, it's not really funny, or do you even say something at all, and knowing, not wanting to be singled out as the angry brown
Right.
person in the room, if you will. So
Right.
yeah, your thoughts on that thought
You know,
process.
being of color in corporate America, it happens to all of us in
Hmm.
some way, form, or fashion. And honestly, and I'll go back for a second. The first time I came across racism was as a kid. I used to go to after school care at the Salvation Army. They have like after school programs, stuff like that. And they say, "Hey, Dominic, we need. Could you come help us load some food in the van? At the supply place or whatever it was, right?" So Miss Jones, me, and a few other uh, uh, kids, we went to go help to go load this van or whatever. And the person who was running the supply place or whatever, he kept saying the phrase "you people." And so when he said that, I'm like 7, 8, 9 years old at the time. I didn't understand what that was. And so when we all got back in the van and Miss Jones was talking to us, she was like, "Look here, as you get older in life, people are going to say certain things. I don't think we had the phrase or microaggression
Hmm.
at the time. This is like the early '90s. It's like people are going to say things in professional settings that are going to be displeasing to you. Make sure that you don't overreact or anything that and the other, but you should say something. And so as we fast forward being in corporate America and stuff like that, I have myself personally pick and choose my battles. It's
Hmm.
one of those things where it's like, is what I'm about to say, is it going to move anything forward, or is it at the very least is it going to make somebody acknowledge something? Or if you know that person and you know they're not going to say anything, why even say anything at all? Just move on to the next job. And so, as a person of color, you're always trying to balance those things.
Right.
And me personally, I tried my best to say something in a tactful manner. I really do. I do that whole, is it important? Is it not important? This that, and the other, or is it a one-off comment, or is this a continuation of a culture that's been pre-installed before I even got here? And once I make that
Right.
determination, I'm like, you know what? It's time to say something. You know what I mean? Even though, to be fair, and this goes back to the previous part of the conversation, um, we should be comfortable to say something on the first attempt, to be honest
Okay.
with you. But I mean, we are, let's be honest, a lot of times whether it be how we deal with the cops or how we deal with corporate America, we are taught very early to, what's the phrase? Get along to get along, or something like that. Something in
Okay.
that regard. And so that's some of the things that come to mind when I think of that. It's just, pick and choosing our battles. And when I get to a point where it's like it's time to say something, it's time to say something. And also being okay with whatever comes with that. And that means I lose my job. That means I lose my job.
Right.
And that's a big ask of everybody. You can't ask that of every person, who has a job. You got a family to feed, and you have all
Right.
this other stuff. And I get that, right? I would never ask anybody to say something if they feel uncomfortable with that. But I know where I am in corporate America, and how I feel about stuff. If you see something, say something, because again, you're going to be invisible, because they're not going to have a clue. So
That's true.
that's
And
what I stand on that.
documenting things, if you kind of want to, like, okay, let's see how,
That's true too. Yeah.
if this picks up, is this a pattern or what's going on here? And, there's recourse for it. Obviously, in this case, you can raise your voice and have your voice heard, and definitely always encourage people to put these types of microaggressions and things like that, and bring it to the forefront, rather. So
And I think you said something earlier that's important. Not only when you document it, but like if you say something, put it in email form. Don't make it verbal. So that way there is a
mm,
running record of it as well. But again, if you're going to say something, be okay with that decision and what may come from the decision to say something. And so if you're passionate enough to say something, then it's okay. You have your morals, you have your conviction, and you should run with it.
yeah, for sure, definitely. So we'll keep everybody updated on the outcome of that, since that's fairly recent, him taking actions. But I appreciate you going over that story with me. This last one, I wanted to get your thoughts on, that everyone was very surprised and excited even about, with President Joe Biden revealing in his student loan debt relief plan that he would either forgive up to $20,000 of the debt held by those who qualify for Pell Grants as undergraduates, or up to $10,000 for those who had the other types of loans. So that's huge, and would make a huge impact for someone's debt to income and their, debt picture. And a president has never done anything like this. So what do you think about this?
It's pretty monumental. It's
Mhm.
pretty monumental. And personally, I haven't said anything on the interwebs and the social medias about it, because I usually try to take some a few days to think about what it is and stuff like that. But I've been seeing a lot of people saying, this is awesome. It's not enough. Why are you doing this? And so I'll just say this. This country asks a lot of 18 to 25-year-olds.
Yeah.
We ask them to vote in elections for elected officials. We ask them to fight our wars. And we also ask them to make possibly the most uh, uh, economical, impactful decision that affects the rest of their lives,
Mm.
right? And when we talk about student loans and how we always push education, 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 go to college, things of that nature, and then most people don't know what a 529 college plan is. Most people don't have parents who are able to send them to college and just write a check. Most people don't have that ability, right? And
Right.
so when you think about that, I 100% am in favor of this move.
Hmm.
I'm 100% in favor of this move, because there are so many people who would not be able to go to college without those student loans, right? I'm
Right.
I'm looking at people who look like me and you, Jen. I'm looking at people who don't look like me and you, who come across the other side of the tracks, right? And so, and again, with that, another reason for that is because college cost has gone up exponentially. Like
Yes.
it's so freaking high. I
Yes.
was looking at some data. I hope you like data and numbers, Jen, because you're about to get some. Okay. I was looking at the education data report here and saying that how in 1969 to 1970 the average annual tuition was like $358, and that's 2040. That's like $2,400 for inflation, right? And you go all the way up to 2020, it's $9,349, right?
Wow.
Like
Mm-hmm.
like that's a massive jump. And so when I see people who practically pay, $500 a year with 2 chickens and a gallon of milk, talking about I paid my tuition off, I paid my student loan debt off, you could pay yours off as well. Well, look, college ain't the same now,
Yeah.
right? And not only has college costs gone up, that Pell Grant money that we're talking about in the plan, it's basically been stagnant since the 80s, right? It basically
Yes.
hasn't moved up a whole lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, inflation with the cost of food and stuff like that. College costs are the same, right? And so again, I think it baffles me when people say, they shouldn't have done this. Could it been, gone a little bit further? Probably, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But as taxpayers, we do have to pay for it. And so when you see somebody on the side of the road, for the most part, if you feel like they're in danger, you get out and help. That is essentially what this is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that is what this is. There are people out there who need help, right? And that is what this is. We talk about, the greatness of America and this and the other. Well, this is a part of it.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying not to be angry about this, but I just think it's hypocritical sometimes
Yeah.
when people say, the greatness is of America, that we take care of each other and this and the other, and then say, nah, I paid my way, they should pay their way too. You know what I mean? And I get it. There should be, let me be clear, there should be some responsibility if you signed your name on the dotted line, right? There
Yes.
should be a little bit, you took out the loan, this and the other. But I mean, let's be honest. Jen, when we were 18, 25 years old, we weren't exactly the smartest people with money, right? And if you come from a culture of color, a lot of times we don't have these lessons about money and bankruptcy and financials and financial literacy and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So again, this move is monumental, and I think it's definitely was sorely needed. It was sorely needed. And full
Yeah.
disclosure, as a veteran, my student loans were canceled under the previous administration,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because due to my service. So I
You
think it's
earned
interesting.
that.
I get that. I get that, and I appreciate that. But I think the move is still the same. Patriotism, whether it be through the military or just trying to be the best U.S. citizen you can be, is still
Look.
patriotism. You know what I mean? And so I don't think one act is much more than the other. I mean, my opinion. You know what I mean? But again, and also, Jen, this is just. I'm sorry, I'm on a soapbox. I'm gonna get off as soon as I can. But I mean, honestly, I think education should be absolutely free. And this is coming from a person who's a capitalist, right? I think things like education and healthcare should be free. And I think it would be interesting if we were talking about credit card debt, would those same people be saying anything? If we were talking about hospital bill debt, would those people be saying anything? Where are those PPP loan people at? Because where's the auto industry? Where is the banks? They all got a bailout the last time I checked.
That's right.
So how come the American people, right? The people who are marginalized, the middle class, and those who are straddling that poverty line, how come they can't get a bailout? So I applaud any and everybody who took the willingness to take out a loan, to bet on themselves to go to school, because that's something to be said for that. You bet on yourself to go to school, right? And then B, you went and got your degree, or maybe you didn't get a degree, but you got a particular set of skills. Hopefully that's not a copyright strike, but you got a particular set of skills to go and be a viable, productive citizen in this country we call America. You know what I mean? And so again, for people to be like, you should have to pay back all of it and this, that, and the other. I understand that, and there should be some responsibility. But the fact that they did get some forbearance and stuff like that, I, I am all with it. I'm off my soapbox now.
No, that was great. I love that. And so, but I mean, look, there's some different variables too. We have the pandemic. Look how many people's jobs were impacted negatively by the
Absolutely.
pandemic. People who were business owners whose jobs were like, you know what I'm saying? Food service, just like there were periods of time during that pandemic where it was just like a wrap.
Absolutely, absolutely, and believe it or not, a college degree doesn't stretch as far as it used to.
Hmm.
In that same vein, you know what I mean? Because with the advent of the internet and the gig economy and stuff like that, and people are finding more and more ways to make money. The college degree, while extremely valuable, let me be clear about that.
Yeah.
While it's still extremely valuable, it's not as valuable as it was maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago,
Yes.
because of there's so many other ways to get money now, whether it be YouTube and podcast or whatever, whether it be Uber or Airbnb and things of that nature. And so again, for people who bet on themselves and was willing to sign their name on a dotted line and found themselves during, a pandemic and inflation, and go back, even 14 years now, the recession of 2008, because those are a lot of those people, millennials like myself, who have those student loan debts, and to go through both of those things and say like, no, you should pay it all back. It's a little bit absurd, and it should be skewed due to the circumstances that we're in.
Definitely. I was happy that he acknowledged that this debt is crippling to some people who, can't purchase a home or something like that because of it.
One of the things that you know we as Americans like to pride ourselves on is American exceptionalism. Like,
Mm.
we are the standard around the world, this, that, and the other. But when you treat the middle class who gets squeezed and squeezed, it seems like every day just a little bit more, the way that we treat them it's laughable, right?
Hmm.
People look at us around the world and they say it's just laughable. You're American exceptionalism, huh? Okay. And honestly, that's a national security issue. When the
Hmm.
people in your country are not happy, they start to rebel, right? They start to rebel. I mean, January 6th taught us that. A lot
Hmm.
of things in history taught us that. You know what I mean?
Oh,
So again, when people aren't happy and they don't feel like they have enough to fill the pump, fill the tank at the pump, feed their family, pay the mortgage, keep the lights on, people get upset. And
mhm.
that's a national security issue. It just is.
It really is, and that's an interesting point you brought up. January 6th, which we've never seen anything like that. I mean, it was like something out of a film. Like,
It's to be fair, there was a certain instance back during the Roosevelt administration,
okay,
the second one, where veterans came to the White House to get a pension that they were promised but never got, and so there was a similar action, but that's the only thing I can remember that's similar to January 6th. But as far as January 6th,
mm,
people are scaling walls like Spider-Man and stuff like that. I
yeah,
just like I was sitting in this very seat when I got the notification. They was like, "Hey, there are people at the Capitol," and they're saying, "Oh, let me see what this is all about." And the images I saw, I was just like, "What? Are you serious? Like that's is that literally happened? This is like you said, it was like a film. It was
yeah,
like it was literally unbelievable what I was seeing." And so and I'm glad a lot of those people were brought to justice and stuff like
definitely.
that. See, now you bring me on another soapbox, Jen. Now I gotta say this, because a lot of people were comparing January 6th to uh, the protest in Minnesota,
Mm,
and things of that nature and stuff like that. Like, how come a lot of those people weren't arrested and stuff like that? First of all, they were,
mm,
and then second of all, a lot of people say, "What's the difference?" Well, it doesn't say "e pluribus unum" on the front of Target. It doesn't say "e pluribus unum" on the doorway of Subway, but it does at the Capitol, right?
Mm.
Like that Latin phrase, "out of many one," that sits on the United States seal. It says that at the Capitol.
Yeah.
That's the problem. That is the gates of our government, that we pride ourselves in democracy so much. And so again, that's the difference. And so, those people who attacked our government and stuff like that, I have absolutely 100% no problem with them being prosecuted to the highest extent of the law. Done speaking.
Oh wow. Yeah. That's a really good point. And there's and I'm actually, I don't know if it's a doctor, if it's gonna, I think it's gonna be a book, but it was a story that of a family that basically got ripped apart because the father was you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about?
I know vaguely
And
about it,
the
but not a whole
son
lot.
had to, or the son felt compelled. My dad is a part of this. He turned his dad in, and like I think the sister and the mom were upset with him because he turned his dad in, and it basically like kind of ruined the family relations.
You know, it's interesting when you talk about family dynamics and stuff like that. There was a New York Times report related to that I saw, that many of the people who are being prosecuted by the FBI and stuff like that have a history of trauma,
Mm,
poverty, things of that nature, right?
okay.
And even those who don't have a history of it, when they went back to their communities, they were basically exiled and
Hmm.
isolated. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so I think that tells us, again, when we talk about going back to, student loan relief and things of that nature, there are people who are out there who are hurting, right? And what, I believe it was Dr. King who said, what's the violence is the language of the unheard. You know what I mean? And
Yes.
that goes across both ways. You know what I mean? Whether it be people who look like us or people who don't look like us. You know what I mean? So again, there are some serious issues in this country, and they're starting to leak out all over the place. And January 6th is just a symptom of that. Some of the protests for, of trying to get racial equality is a symptom of that.
Hmm.
And so once people start to recognize that, then I think we'll be a better country for it. So I let me be clear. I love the United States of America. I really do.
Sure.
I absolutely do. But
And
at the
we
same
appreciate your
time,
service too.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And and that's one of the things we like to do with Black as Americans, to highlight that, our show really is about sharing that the story of America couldn't have been written without people who look like me and you, Jen. And that's why I do this show. But the thing is, I love America, but we have issues, and those issues need to be resolved, and it needs to be resolved across the spectrum. So
For
I'm
sure.
off my soapbox.
Oh no! Sometimes I forget that you're a veteran too. So, and that brings like a whole nother perspective to your story and message, and that's like deep. So, yeah, that's awesome.
I appreciate that.
Oh, for sure. So, yeah, let's talk about that podcast. Since we're right there, you have a show that you've made mention of called Black is America. And so, for someone who doesn't know what this Black is America podcast, what is this?
So, Black is America is a podcast. It's a history storytelling themed podcast where we highlight the stories of Black Americans, either well known, little known stories about well known Black Americans, or little known Black Americans that you may not be familiar with. We started season one back in February for Black History Month for obvious reasons. Um, with our story on Lieutenant John Fox. Lieutenant John Fox was a soldier in the United States Army during World War II, where he was in a town in Italy, Soma Colonia, where he found himself surrounded by Germans. And this is after going through, segregated units, being segregated and stuff like that. Within the army he's serving, he's surrounded by Germans, and he calls an artillery strike on himself because he knows that, like, he's not going to be able to make it, right? But he knows if he makes this call, that it's going to be devastating to the German forces that are there, and they'll be able to retake that Italian city, right? And so these are the type of stories of Black America that doesn't get told about. Like, we are heroes, right?
Mhm.
We are out here telling the story, writing the story of America. I mean, think about it. Can you imagine the story of the United States without Black America? It
No,
would be like unseasoned chicken. It really would, right? Because
considering that Black Americans built the country
we
in the
Black
White
Americans
House.
built the. Not only did we build this country, but it's also like like when we talk about using our culture,
Mhm.
as a overextender into the world, how we influence the world, and so these are the type of stories that we try to tell on Black is America. Like we talked about the story of Lieutenant John Fox, and we talked about the story of Wendell Scott, who was a Black NASCAR driver in the 60s, right? And his story is fascinating because, it goes to show how the story of Black America a lot of times is we do the most with the least, right?
Mhm.
It's amazing how we're able to create these legacies, these creative things, these functions with little to no resources, right? A lot of people
Right.
like to say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. The thing is about Black America is that we have custom made bootstraps, and those bootstraps, and those boots come extremely valuable once you see the end product of it. It happens every single time, from our music to our culture, our military service. It goes, so far that is just mind boggling to me. So I wanted to just tell these stories in this platform we call, podcasting, to kind of highlight these amazing ancestors of ours. And so it's been pretty phenomenal. Somebody may have thrown a few statues our way to kind of say that you may have something going here and stuff like that. But we really have a phenomenal time with telling the stories. And like that one that you have kind of presented, the story of Memorial Day is just a fascinating story, because we go out and have barbecues and stuff like that, and not coming to find out that people who look like me and you, Jen, created the holiday.
Mhm.
It's interesting, and we talk about this in the clubhouse. We're sorry, incoming rant again. I get how, if you're African American, Black American, and stuff like that, you may not want to celebrate certain holidays, 4th of July,
Mm.
Memorial Day. I totally understand that. But the thing is that I would implore you to at least think about is two things. One, more often than not, Black America was instrumental in that in that story and that holiday being formed in the first place. Like whether it be the Memorial Day uh, thing we were just talking about, or even the 4th of July, where we talk about Christmas addicts and Peter Salem and Salem Poor, and all the spies that were helping George Washington, during the American Revolutionary War, or the enslaved people during the American Revolutionary War who taught the surgeons about inoculation to save them from smallpox, right?
Mm.
And so again, as an African American, I can understand why it's hard to celebrate the 4th of July and stuff like that. But one thing I would say is like, hey, celebrate it differently. Celebrate the 4th of July and honor Christmas addicts. Celebrate Memorial Day and honor the people in Charleston, South Carolina who created the holiday.
Mhm.
Redefine what the 4th of July is, redefine what Memorial Day is, redefine what Veterans Day is. And so, and make it centered towards people who look like us, because I just don't want people to, while you're, you know, not, celebrating, a certain part of America, don't forget about Black America who
True.
made that possible for us as well. So I just wanted to get that in there as well.
For sure, definitely. So we will have that link posted, you guys, so you can check out the Black is America podcast. And then the other podcast that the entrepreneur one.
Hmm. The
Oh, tell
startup
us
life.
about that one. Yes.
So the startup life was that's my baby. When I started podcasting, that was the very first podcast that I did. And so in 2016, started the Startup Life podcast, just talking about entrepreneurship and business. I first started off just kind of doing solo episodes, and then eventually I brought guests on and things of that nature. And then eventually we were able to interview the likes of the co-founder of Netflix, the founder of Paychex, the founder of Dunkin' Donuts, the chief marketing officer of MasterCard,
Oh,
uh,
great.
founder of Rue 21s, people like that. And so it just took years and years of building these cadre of guests to where we was able to build something from the startup life. And then a few years after that, a behavioral health company called me and say, "Hey, we love what you're doing with the startup life. Our person just left for NPR. Would you be willing to do what you do for the startup life for us and our podcast?" And so that's why I podcast, not just for myself, but for corporate America, behavioral health company
Mhm.
as well. And so I'm just about that pod life a little bit, I guess.
And you still do the startup life.
Well, it's on hiatus. I'm going to be in the
Okay.
process. I'm going to be on the process. It's still up, but I'm going to be in the process of going ahead and closing out the startup life. It's been a fantastic run, fantastic 6-year run, over 300 episodes, which I'm
Oh, wow.
immensely proud of that
That's
work, and
exciting.
and being able to syndicate it to radio, have fantastic guests, have more importantly fantastic audience. And I'm gonna try not to get emotional here because the thing is, like, that show changed the trajectory of my family's life and lifestyle. You know what I mean? And so
That's
being
great.
able to support it and put money into it, and to get that return on investment has been extremely helpful for me and my family. So it's the startup life is my baby, and it will always have a special place in my heart. But with everything, all good things must come to an end, and so
For sure.
I knew that I wanted to do some more type of content like Black is America and the mental health content we do for the behavioral health company. I knew I wanted, as a creative, wanted to do some other things. And so in order to do that, I knew I had to go ahead and start closing out the startup life. So we'll start doing those farewell episodes pretty soon, probably in November 7th. There's about 60 episodes in the can that have never been released.
How
Uh,
many?
about 60.
Oh my God.
About 60
That's
episodes.
amazing.
So I really do take a Tupac approach when it comes to content. Like when he got out of jail and did the first 7 songs of All Eyes on Me, I really do take an approach where I'm just making content, making content, making content.
Oh
So
my
there's
God, you
about
are getting teary
yeah.
eyed.
So it's I mean. I get so I mean okay I'll tell a small story if I could really quickly. So the thing is it's 2019 and it's 2019 and I knew that as far as like when you're an entrepreneur you got to put money in, and so money wasn't always the best around here, but you believe in this thing, you believe in this goal. So I started doing Uber, if you will, right? Start driving Uber and stuff like that. And and so my day was get up at 3:30, go out and do Uber starting at 4 o'clock in the morning. And this is in Memphis, so Memphis, Jim. Memphis ain't exactly Mayberry, you know what I mean? So starting off at 4 a.m., doing Uber runs and stuff like that. Come back around 10 o'clock, do a recording of the startup life. And this went on for about 2 years, like just getting up 3:30. And we're talking 7 days a week, two
Mhm.
years, getting up 3:30, going out at 4 o'clock, Uber runs, come back at 10, get a little bit of rest, do a recording, go back out to make sure I made a quota that I want to make sure, because I knew how much I need to make in order to keep doing the startup life and make sure provide for my family. Uh, so kept doing that. And then 2 years, I get the phone call. It's like, hey, this is the behavioral health company. And they actually had called me 6 days before I saw the voicemail. Right, in some kind of way, I didn't see the voicemail message. So I look at my phone, get ready for a recording, see the voicemail. It's like, hey, call us from this company. We would love to talk to you about podcasting, doing that for us, this, that, and the other. And so I called them. They brought me out for an interview. And it got to a point where, in the part of the interview where it's like they're trying to convince you to take it more than you're trying to convince them to get the job. And so it got to that point, and I knew it's like, okay, well, I talked to my wife, Kenda. It's like, I got a number in mind. This is the number. And they exceeded that number. And so I knew then that podcasting was my thing. And so that's why the start of life makes me teary eyed, because had I not kept doing that show during, that period, and this is during the pandemic, had
Mhm.
I not kept doing that, I would not, have this company, doing podcasts for this company. I wouldn't have this thing here. I wouldn't have any of that. Like
Yeah.
none of that happens if I didn't keep doing that. And the startup life was that vehicle to make that happen.
Oh
Along with
wow.
an extremely supportive, loving, caring wife.
Of
And so,
course, your tribe, definitely.
absolutely, absolutely. So that's why I'm getting a little teary eyed. So my apologies.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, like I felt that. Like I like feel the emotion. Like that's cool. That's
Yeah,
awesome. That's a great story. That
I appreciate that.
is. Yeah, for
Thank
sure.
you
And
for
I'm
letting me
glad.
share. I've never shared that story publicly before.
Really? Okay.
I've never shared that story publicly before.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you for feeling comfortable to do so. And that's awesome. Like, yeah, this podcasting is just kind of interesting. Maybe some of that'll rub off on me one.
Oh, throw it through the screen. There you go.
Yeah, all that. I need all that. Okay. And look, guys, like I said, this is really woke by accident. I wasn't trying to be this, person, but I just felt compelled to have, my voice and my truth and put it out there.
I
And
hear that.
so, and then there's other people who have a similar, point of view. And so it just works. And
I,
so,
I strongly believe whatever you're seeking, Jen, is also seeking you. I believe that.
mhm.
I strongly believe that.
Okay. Well, I receive that. And I appreciate that. Because, sometimes, you don't always get the, you can do it.
Right.
But I just tell myself in my mind, you know, or I have my own little Tupac, doom, doom,
Right.
doom, and get my own
Absolutely.
self hype, So
Absolutely.
whatever it
Absolutely.
is, you guys get your own self motivated, or in the great words of Cat Williams, let your haters be your motivators.
There it is.
Whatever
There it
works,
is.
right?
There it is.
For sure. So with that, we will have the links posted for Dominic's podcast so that you can check it out. And I'm really excited about sharing that with you guys. Anything else to share, Dominic?
I just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity. The Woke by Accident podcast is definitely in the rotation of podcasts that I listen to. I am a subscriber, and I just want to give you your flowers and say thank you for what you do for the culture, informing us of these news stories. Because the first part of changing the world is letting us know that there are things happening and that we need to be aware of what's going on. And so your platform, Work by Accident, does an amazing job of doing that. So I want to make sure that people who are listening to this, make sure you subscribe to the Woke by Accident podcast and that you're out there doing the work. So I really appreciate you, Jen.
Hey, I received that too. Thank you for pouring into me positivity and all of that. You always have something positive to say, so I appreciate and receive that for sure. Thank you so much. And anything else that you need to get on the soapbox for?
No, I'm good. I've worn out your soapbox far enough, so I don't want to overstay my welcome. So
Oh no, you're welcome here anytime. And we thank you guys for listening and take care. Thank you guys.